Now, when it comes to Jack Freeman and specifically when it comes to the offensive line, I know, Starnes, you mentioned the receiver group, but I think the offensive line could be one of those other positions that heading into the season you feel confident about just because of the continuity standpoint. But what are your thoughts on the offensive line heading into the upcoming season?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting group with 4-year starters and Patrick Paul and Jack Freeman. Or I don't know if Jack Freeman was a 4-year starter, but guys who've been here for the last 4 years are going into their fifth year. Guys like that, Ruben Unije, those guys, that continuity, and also I think one of the interesting things was their new offensive line coach Iman Nagavi came out of Tulane. Tulane obviously had an incredible year, winning the Cotton Bowl, I believe it was, in against USC behind Ty J. Spears and that sort of running attack, and also coming from the area, came out of Katy High School. I went to Cinco Ranch. They were our rivals. They always kicked our butts. But so I think that it'll be sort of I think personally, this offensive line group is probably definitely the most important group going into the year with new quarterbacks and, going in against those new defenses in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I think the key is those two names that you mentioned with Freeman and Patrick Paul. I think Tyler Johnson is the name that I heard Coach Holgorsen mention a lot, transfer from Texas. I think he will step in and play a key role. But I think it is the most important position group because not only to give the quarterback time, but to give the running backs room to run the football. I think there'll be emphasis to run the football as it always is in Coach Holgorsen's staff, but losing Alton and having Brandon Campbell, you still have Snead, you still got Keaton Walker, you had the transfer from West Virginia come in as well. And so the offensive line, I think, can be a really cohesive group, but they're probably are the most important group because if you don't have protection, you can't open up holes, then it's almost null and void to be able to get those playmakers the ball in space with all those receivers that they have on the outside and the talent that they have in the backfield. But I think it was a strength last year, and I think it can even be be a strength again this year. But I think it all starts up front with the offensive line. And can they be able to protect the quarterback and open some holes for the running back?
And I do think it says something about the team that, of the 4 players that they brought to media day were offensive linemen.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, most definitely. And it's kind of interesting when you think back to the offseason. There's going to be a lot of change. We alluded to the 42 new players that are the new faces that are on the roster, but there's just a lot of change overall. You mentioned Nagavi, the new offensive line coach. You can tell just by hearing head coach Dana Holgorsen talk how highly he thinks of him and specifically what he was able to do. You mentioned Tulane, but even at his previous stops, that's definitely going to be a point of emphasis for this team. And Starnes, you were a part of some of the availabilities. I think Holgorsen was very much more, there was a much more emphasis on it during the early season ones, but the early in the season availabilities, but there was a focus on wanting to run the ball effectively last season, and especially during the first part of the month, it was a struggle to be able to really establish a dominant run game, and that's part of the reasons why there was just some struggles at the beginning of the season for the football team, and that's one of the reasons that Nagavi was brought in here to be able to really being able to establish what he did at his previous stops and make that a point of emphasis this year. Now, we know that quarterback Clayton Tune was mobile a little bit, but they didn't necessarily want him, scrambling at often. They wanted him to, if he had to scramble, it was really in emergency situations. When you think of quarterback Lucas Coley and Donovan Smith, specifically when it comes to Donovan Smith, and something that he was able to excel at Texas Tech was being able to use his legs. Do you think that's going to be a much more point of emphasis, or could it be something that at this point you just don't know because of how early it is?
I mean, I definitely think it'll be a part, especially just going into this new conference and playing some of the teams. You may kind of have to pull out all the stops sometimes, especially with the running game that sort of struggled last year, at least early on. And sort of with the offensive line you have, I mean, it'll take pressure off of them, but if that offensive line really does gel and does as well as maybe they can, that'll open up new lanes for Donovan Smith and Lucas Coley to run.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think they will use more of a pass read option as well as read option with the quarterbacks. I think they'll give them the opportunity to be able to either pass, run, or scramble and make more plays, because I think they're going to look to control the time of possession and stay ahead of the chains a lot. I think they'll look to try to stay out of those 3rd and 6 and 7, 8 downs and try to stay in those 3rd and manageable situations just so they can keep the playbook open and not put so much pressure on the quarterback to have to make throws. So with doing that, I think they will run some design quarterback runs, but within that, there'll be some pass read options to kind of get the ball out quick screens, get it out to some of your prolific playmakers on the outside.
And to your point with the ball control, the new rules this year with the first down rule, the clock doesn't stop after a first down. Mm-hmm. So, Dana didn't say much would change, but, his emphasis on ball control, is definitely aided by those new rules, and that'll probably open up some new options for running and things like that.
That's a great point, Starns, and kind of shifting gears and focusing on the defense. Obviously, that was a unit that struggled last season. It was a big part of why Houston as a team struggled throughout the course of the season. What can you tell us about specifically what you feel about different positions on the defensive side of things, and maybe something that Hassan Hippolyte or Nelson Caesar said during media day?
I think Nelson Caesar is going to be definitely an X factor, along with the transfer out of Oklahoma, David Ugwebu. And that defensive line is really going to have to show up, especially, I think they took such a hit last year losing Derek Parrish for the year. And then in terms of, the linebacker group, Hassan Hippolyte making that change to safety, he's pretty excited about it. It seemed like, especially he mentioned that, as a safety, he would get in trouble a lot for being aggressive and having a nose towards the line of scrimmage. And now being a linebacker, he's not going to really have that. He's not going to get in trouble as much with that. It's not going to be a problem. So I think, those two areas, I like some of the DBs that they have, some of the ones that they brought in. So it'll be interesting. It'll be tough. I mean, there's some really good offenses in the Big 12, and coming off of last year, it'll be interesting to see how they hold up.
Yeah, well, I think we have two really good corners, and Jalen Emery as well as Alex Hogan. Now, and as well as linebackers. I like our linebackers with Hassan Hippolyte as well as Malik Robinson. But I think the back end, the safeties, I think that's a position I'm going to keep my eye on and see who kind of emerges as starters and playmakers on the back end on the safety. But I like Houston's defensive back, but I think it all starts up front with Zach Ave and the defensive line. I mean, over the last 5 to 6 years, Houston has had a dominant defensive lineman that has really made it the jobs, I don't want to say easier, but kind of made the secondary forced them to not have to cover so long. So in which it helps them out. And so I think it is going to be important for Nelson Caesar and some of the new additions, like you just mentioned, to come in and have an impact. I think Dot would be a bully in the interior of that line and be able to stop some runs, but it's going to be a collective effort. In the Big 12, they're going to have defend high-powered offenses game in and game out, week to week. And so I think that's going to be probably the biggest transition as we continue to see Houston play against some of these Power 5 schools week in and week out.
A few more things for you, Starn, specifically in regards to the roster makeup heading into training camp. But I'm curious to get what are your thoughts on the secondary heading into the season? Because like Dion mentioned, specifically when it comes to safety, but overall for that position group as a whole last season, a big part of it had to do with injuries. There was a lot of times when freshmen, sophomores, they weren't expected to get playing time, something that defensive coordinator Doug Belk mentioned over the course of the season. They had to get a lot of run because there was just no one else to play. But what are your expectations of that group specifically heading into the season?
I think it having a good DB group, of course, helps. But I remember I think earlier in the year, in one of these podcasts, Ryan Monso mentioned how the year prior with Marcus Jones and Demarion Williams,
Hmm.
it helps sort of everything. Sort of the room for error is more. You get the offensive line gets more time to get to the quarterback, and linebackers are able to pass off their mismatches and things like that. So if Jalen Emery and Alex Hogan are able to play well, be healthy, and play well, it could, it could be a huge boost to that defense.
Yeah, most definitely. That's a great point. So you forget. I mean, both those guys went on to play in the NFL, and obviously, of course, we know what Marcus Jones was able to do for the New England Patriots. Now, last question, specifically about kind of the makeup of the team, but specifically when it comes to, I guess this is much more or less about overall expectations. I mentioned the preseason poll. It is what it is. There's not a lot of stock into it. At the end of the day, it's based off narratives. But do you think what do you think the ceiling of this team can be in the first year of the Big 12?
The ceiling, to me, if this team ends up with 7, 8 wins, I think you should be thrilled, honestly. With some of the teams that they're playing in the first year, and again, all those new guys, it's going to be tough to really just sort of come into the Big 12 and really sort of take ownership. There are a few games, of course, early on in the year that they should be able to take it. With Rice, they've beaten. They haven't lost to them in almost 13 years, something like that.
It's been a long
Houston.
time. They came close last year, though.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I think we'll learn a lot against UTSA. UTSA also lost a good bit of their team. It's a good program. I think we'll learn sort of what the ceiling and what the floor is for this team in that week 1 matchup.
Do you think, bring up a comment from one of our viewers on YouTube watching live, do you think there's any type of hot seat for Dana Holgorsen, or it is a transition year? It's, for the most part, he's going to be the head coach, barring the worst case scenario.
Again, worst case, I can see it. Yeah, absolutely. Chris Pesman, throughout sort of the week, throughout media day, he was mentioning, get to a bowl game, and however stock you want to put into that, if they do, if they don't, I do think there is an expectation to, at least for this team, be competitive in the Big 12 in that first year. And, if they don't, if they really fall on their face, who knows? It'll be the first year. Maybe there's a bit of a cushion there for them. But yeah, that's really what I think.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be a total disaster, maybe 2 or 3 wins for Holgorsen to be on the hot seat. I think for me, from what I've seen, I think he does a good job of of managing the expectation with not only within the media, but within the program and within the higher ups, who people above him. I think it's not high expectations to come in and win. So but at the same time, I think there will be outside pressure if the team just wins maybe 2 or 3 games. I think then we'll see the fans and a lot of people clamoring for his job. But even then, I don't know if they make the move.
For sure, I agree. I think worst case scenario, like both of you mentioned, 2-3 wins. I think specifically losing to Rice or Sam Houston, one of those, that would be worst case scenario. But even then, first of all, I don't think that's likely at all. I think they'll most definitely be able to. Honestly, I think they could win out their non-conference slate. I mean, Starns, you alluded to, a lot of it will be answered that first game 1 against UTSA. I personally don't think that they will reach rock bottom this season. I think, hear what Joe Mendes said, 6-6 with a bowl victory, he'll take that all day long. And to be quite honest, to be quite frank, I think that is kind of the trajectory of this team. I think they're around that from 5 to 7 wins. I think that's the mark of this team. Now, they very well could prove us all wrong and win more games than that. But I think that this is definitely a step here, a stepping stone. It's year one. They're trying to build, and there's a lot of emphasis on the future, and specifically when it comes to continuity. And Starnes, I'm gonna plug one of your Daily Cougar the Cougar articles, but obviously you interviewed Chris Pesman, and specifically he was talking about the baseball coach and Todd Whitting, and how he wanted him to stay because he feels that he's the right person to be able to lead the team during that transition, that talk of transition. Very important when it comes to continuity. I think you can put Dana Holgorsen in that same boat. What say you about that, Starnes?
I mean, absolutely. I think, there's definitely a feeling, especially just with the revenue and the operating budget that the school will have in comparison to other Big 12 schools. I think they want to sort of catch up a little bit and then maybe sort of see if they, when they invest properly into those programs, especially football, Calvin Sampson, that'll be fine. But, baseball, things like that. I mean, I think the goal is to sort of get these programs up to speed, especially the football facility, things like that. They want to get them up to speed. And then, if they are up to speed or they're close to, and they're not seeing what they want, then maybe that'll be a decision to make.